more comments now, and this comes again from the Russian media, about how the oil price cap on Russian oil is gradually breaking down. And this comes from another Russian newspaper, Rossiyskaya Gazeta. The European Union's expenditures for procuring Russian energy commodities have shrunk by nearly fourfold since November 2022, but still exceed 1 billion euros per month. And it says that other countries, despite the price cap on Russian oil and introduced by the EU and the G7, China's spending on imports of Russian hydrocarbons has remained constant at last year's levels, whilst those of India and Turkey have grown. These countries also increased their fuel exports to Europe, which are actually insured by Russian commodity supplies, for which the EU ends up paying at the end of the day. And it says that the EU and G7 are currently discussing sanctions to prevent third country companies from bypassing the price cap, but in fact Europe is trying to change the market situation in its favour rather than reduce Russia's fiscal revenues. Today, Moscow's revenues depend not so much on the price of the Russian benchmark Urals blend delivered to European ports, but on the price of the global Brent benchmark at a fixed maximum discount. The EU is betting on competition. If Russian oil prices go down, other suppliers will also have to reduce their rates. However, most forecasters say that demand will grow in the second half of the year and oil prices will rise. And we then go on to read that Finam analyst Alexander Potavin points out that apart from the Russian oil price cap, increasing freight costs also affected the discount rate in late 2022, early 2023. However, as export channels are being established, discount rates for new customers is declining. So the article from Viedomosti then goes on to make the obvious point that reducing Russian oil supply is a bad idea anyway from the West, because it increases pressure on oil prices, and that limits the degree to which the Western countries can increase pressure on countries like India. If the country reduces its oil imports, logistics disruptions will push discount rates up, and a reduction in Russian oil supply in the market is not what the EU wants, because it could once again result in a rise in global prices. This is why the masterminds of sanctions will have to maintain a delicate gap balance between tough restrictions and the risk of going too far, simply leaving without fuel should India or Turkey significantly reduce their Russian imports. So we have a situation where the Europeans are telling India, don't import Russian oil, or at least don't import too much. Just import some, but not more than that. That is an impossible game to play. So the oil price caps failed. The export restrictions on Russian oil have failed. The Russian economy, as I said, gives every sign of being strong and resilient and able to keep going, and keep going pretty much indefinitely. And in the meantime, we have the Prime Minister, the Russian Prime Minister, Mr. Mishustin. He's off in China. He's had meetings with the Chinese Prime Minister. He's visited Shanghai. He's somebody, by the way, with a technological background. He graduated from Stankin, which is one of Russia's technological universities. So he has that sort of technological background, which he shares with many Chinese officials. Anyway, there he is in China, developing relationships with China. He says that the relationship with China is now Russia's strategic choice. Trade between the two countries is surging, and it has a long way to go because, of course, Russia has now become a major oil exporter to China. It's also now a major natural gas exporter too, but the big gas pipelines are still under construction. That business is probably still in its relatively early stages. And we're going to see much more of that. We're going to see more Chinese penetration of the Russian market, more projects, the Chinese and the Russians working together. The Indians will want to become involved as well. So, war without end is not even sustainable. The West can't outproduce the Russians, certainly not in the medium to short term, in arms production. Gideon Rachman himself has said it. Unless they convert to a war economy. And who in the West, what political leader in the West is advocating that? Not one. So they can't outproduce the Russians. They can't break Russia's economy. The ruble hasn't cratered. The economy hasn't collapsed. Russia remains basically self-sufficient in food. It's self-sufficient in energy. Its export revenues are holding up. And the BND itself admits that, and it further admits that the government in Moscow is stable and faces no short or medium-term challenge. So everything now hangs on this offensive, this Ukrainian offensive. And as I discussed earlier in this program, the foretaste that we got in the offensive around Bakhmut suggests that it's going to be very difficult, that it might not succeed. In fact, it probably won't succeed. Ukraine made a big effort around Bakhmut to regain ground, to break the siege of Bakhmut, to push the Russians back in Bakhmut. It failed entirely. It wasn't even able to capture a little place like Sako and Vanseti, as the Russian commentator Boris Rozhin has recently pointed out, and Ukraine has suffered very heavy losses in making that attempt, which, however, would presumably pale compared to the losses it would suffer when the offensive it's now planning to launch is eventually launched. And so I come back to this fundamental question. What then? What if the offensive fails, or if it only achieves limited gains? If they capture, say, a few villages in Belgorod, or even a small Russian town, or break through and reach Melitopol, or take the Zaporozhye nuclear power plant, how does that change the overall strategic picture? It doesn't. And it seems to me that talk of frozen conflicts, unacceptable to the Russians. Why would they agree to such a thing, as I've discussed in the past? Really doesn't make any kind of sense. Talk about arresting Vladimir Putin. There's an article in The Guardian today by the former British Prime Minister Gordon Brown. I used to think that he was one of those people more connected to reality in Britain, but it seems he's lost sight of events too. Anyway, all of this talk, keeping it going as long as it takes, it doesn't represent the reality. And this rather desperate F-16 delivery, in which, as I said, even the Pentagon has made it publicly known that they don't believe in it. It shows how futile and pointless this thing has become. Anyway, there we go. The Russians have now taken Bakhmut. As I said, it does seem that they're intent on consolidating their position around Bakhmut. There were some scattered reports that they are now going to try and take Khromovo, which is still just under Ukrainian control. At some point, I'm fairly confident that they'll want to push to take Ivanivska, the other town southwest of Bakhmut, or rather village southwest of Bakhmut, and they'll probably want to press on and take Chasov Yar as well. These are real military moves. What we've just seen in Belgorod, for the moment at least, doesn't look like that. And a Ukrainian offensive into Russia itself, into Belgorod region and Bryansk region, seems to me like a catastrophically bad idea. The United States itself has publicly said as much at various times, and yet a further indication of how at sea Western policy has become is that even as Western leaders condemn these moves, simultaneously they look the other way when they happen. But there we go. So we'll see. I'm sorry to say, I think that this offensive is unavoidable. We might start to see some serious steps taken towards achieving peace once it's over and out of the way. But in the meantime, the long grind in the war goes on. The Russians continue to grind the Ukrainians down. They continue to inflict heavy losses on the Ukrainians all over the battlefields. Ukraine, so far, its offensive in Bakhmut was a failure. Its attack in Belgorod is a distraction and an irrelevance, and the Western powers have no clear plan. Not a happy picture overall, but there we are. Thank you for joining me again today. More from me soon. Let me remind you again, you can follow all our programs on our various platforms: Locals, Rumble, BitChute, Odyssey, Rockfin and Telegram. You can also support our work via Patreon and Subscribestar, links under this video. You can check out our shop and get yourself the great things that you will find there: our magic mugs, our hats, our hoodies, our t-shirts, our sweatshirts and all those things. And last but not least, if you've liked this video, please remember to tick the like button and to check your subscription to this channel. That's me for today. More from me soon. I suspect we'll be getting some more concrete information from the battlefronts fairly soon, and we'll see what happens in Belgorod and when this Ukrainian offensive finally comes. Thank you again, and have a very good day.